Listen up, because what I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you think you know about getting inside her head. You've been doing it all wrong. Every text, every call, every attempt to stay on her mind has been pushing you further into the friend zone, further into irrelevance, further into that black hole where forgotten men go to die. You think being available makes you memorable. You think being sweet makes you special. You think being predictable makes you reliable. Wrong. Dead wrong. What makes you unforgettable isn't your presence. It's your absence. What makes you irresistible isn't your attention, it's your indifference. What makes you magnetic isn't how much you give, it's how little you need. She doesn't think about the man who's always there. She obsesses over the man who isn't. She doesn't crave the man who answers every text in 30 seconds. She fantasizes about the man who leaves her messages on read for hours, sometimes days. She doesn't desire the man who explains his every move. She's haunted by the man who moves in silence. You want to live rent-free in her mind, stop paying rent in hers. You want to become her obsession, stop making her yours. You want her to think about you non-stop, give her brain no choice but to fill the void you created. Here's the brutal truth most men will never understand. A woman's mind is like a puzzle, and you've been handing her all the pieces. When she has the complete picture, the game is over. The mystery dies. The intrigue vanishes. She files you away under solved and moves on to the next challenge. But the man who keeps pieces hidden, who never reveals his full hand, who remains partially unknowable, he becomes the puzzle she can't put down. He becomes the song stuck on repeat in her head. He becomes the itch she can't scratch because she can never quite reach it. You think you need to be the center of her world. That's your first mistake. Centers are stable, predictable, boring. You need to be the question mark that keeps her guessing. You need to be the variable in her equation that she can never quite solve. You need to be the book she can't put down because she never knows what's coming next. Most men try to win her by being consistent, always available, always eager, always ready to jump when she says jump. But consistency without mystery is just predictability. And predictable men don't live in women's thoughts, they live in their routine. They become background noise, elevator music, wallpaper. The man who occupies her mind, non-stop, is the one who disrupts her routine. He shows up when she doesn't expect it and disappears when she needs him most. Not because he's playing games, but because he's living his life on his own terms. His world doesn't revolve around her schedule, her moods, her needs. His world revolves around his mission, his goals, his own damn agenda. When you have your own life, your own purpose, your own direction, something magical happens. You become scarce, and scarcity creates value. Basic economics applied to human psychology. The more available you are, the less she values your time. The more you chase, the less she values your attention. The more you give without receiving, the less she values your effort. But flip the script. Become selective with your time. Become protective of your energy. Become intentional with your attention. Suddenly, every moment she gets with you feels earned, not given. Every text from you carries weight because it's not drowning in a sea of desperate messages. Every date feels special because it's not just another Tuesday where you're available. She starts wondering what you're doing when you're not with her. She starts questioning why you're not texting back immediately. She starts analyzing every word you say, looking for clues about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're planning. Her brain goes into overdrive trying to decode you, and that mental energy creates an addiction. You see, when she can predict your every move, her brain relaxes. You're categorized, filed away, handled, but uncertainty activates her mind. It forces her to think, to wonder, to imagine. And when a woman's imagination is engaged, when her curiosity is triggered, when her analytical mind is working overtime trying to figure you out, that's when you've won the battle for her thoughts. The man who lives in her head rent-free isn't the one constantly knocking on the door. He's the one who built something so interesting inside that she keeps coming back to explore. He created an experience, not an expectation. He became a discovery, not a dependency. Here's what this looks like in practice. You don't text her good morning every day. When you do text her good morning, it hits different because it's unexpected. You don't tell her you miss her every time you're apart. When you do express that feeling, it carries actual weight because it's rare. You don't shower her with compliments constantly. When you do acknowledge her beauty, her intelligence, her worth, she actually hears it because it's not white noise. You become expensive with your validation. You become selective with your approval. You become intentional with your affection. And in doing so, you make every interaction count. Every word becomes meaningful because it's not diluted by 1,000 meaningless words. Every gesture becomes significant because it's not lost in a sea of desperate attempts to win her over. But here's the deeper level that separates the boys from the men. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about playing hard to get. This isn't about creating artificial scarcity through games and tactics. This is about genuinely becoming a man worth thinking about. This is about developing yourself to the point where your natural lifestyle creates the scarcity that drives her crazy. When you're genuinely busy building an empire, you naturally become less available. When you're truly focused on your mission, you naturally become more selective with your time. When you're authentically confident in your value, you naturally stop seeking validation from others. The scarcity isn't manufactured, it's organic. The mystery isn't performed, it's lived. She thinks about you non-stop because you've given her brain a problem it can't solve. You've become the variable she can't control, the outcome she can't predict, the story she can't finish. Every interaction leaves her with more questions than answers. Every conversation reveals just enough to keep her interested, but not enough to satisfy her curiosity. You become the man she talks about to her friends, not because you're her boyfriend, but because you're the riddle she can't crack. You become the topic of her journal entries, not because you're pursuing her, but because she's trying to understand you. You become the last thought before she sleeps, and the first thought when she wakes, not because you're constantly in contact, but because you're constantly on her mind. The irony is beautiful. The more you try to stay on her mind, the less mental real estate you occupy. The more you chase her thoughts, the less she thinks about you. The more you need her attention, the less attention she gives you. But the moment you stop needing her to think about you, the moment you become content whether she does or doesn't, the moment you find your completeness outside of her consciousness, that's when you become impossible to forget. You don't get into her head by force. You get invited in by becoming interesting enough to warrant the invitation. You don't stay in her thoughts through persistence. You remain there by being valuable enough to deserve the mental space. You don't become her obsession through pressure. You become unforgettable by being genuinely worth remembering. The man who lives in her thoughts non-stop isn't trying to get there. He's too busy building a life worth thinking about. He's not wondering if she's thinking about him because he's too focused on things that actually matter. He's not checking if she's watching his stories because he's too busy writing his own story. And that's the ultimate paradox. The less you need her to think about you, the more she will. The less you care about occupying her mind, the more space you'll take up in it. The less you try to be unforgettable, the more impossible you become to forget. So stop trying to get into her head. Start building a life so magnetic, so purposeful, so undeniably powerful that her thoughts have no choice but to gravitate toward you. Stop chasing her mind. Start creating a mind worth chasing. Stop trying to be her obsession. Start becoming a man worth obsessing over. That's how you get her to think about you non-stop. Not by begging for her thoughts, but by earning them. Not by demanding her mental space, but by deserving it. Not by trying to be unforgettable, but by becoming impossible to forget.